In the off chance you've been living under a rock, this is what's been coming out of the White House lately.
I terminated the ridiculous Green New scam. I withdrew from the unfair Paris Climate Accord. It's called Drill, Baby, Drill. We're going back to plastic straws.
Since taking office in late January, Trump has unleashed a torrent of policy initiatives that roll back climate progress. Like, seriously. Trump 2.0 is doubling down on its belief that climate change is overblown.
We're at the top of that roller coaster and we're going down. It's just not clear what's at the bottom.
We're entering into a very turbulent and difficult time period.
Who's looking at the big picture here? I honestly don't know.
So how far is Trump rolling back climate protection? And how much does this hurt global progress? It all started on his first day in office. First, Trump freezes the Inflation Reduction Act, the U.S.'s largest climate action fund, with $369 billion earmarked for clean energy. Then he suspends offshore wind projects. Same day, he quits Paris, again. And that was just for starters. Let's speed walk here because there's just so much to cover. Day 26, Trump turbocharges the country's oil and gas production. Day 37, he claws back the country's founding environmental protection laws. Day 45, he withdraws the U.S. from an agreement that helps fund the energy transition in countries like South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Senegal. He also bails from a fund helping other countries weather climate disasters. Day 76, Trump rolls back protection of national forests. Day 81, he ends environmental checks for thousands of federal oil and gas leases. Day 103, Trump's budget proposal cancels more than $15 billion in carbon capture and renewable energy funding. As we went to press, Columbia University has logged more than 100 efforts of Trump to scale back federal climate measures, and that number just keeps climbing.
The Trump administration, kind of this version 2.0, learned lessons from version 1.0.
Jay Turner is a professor of environmental studies at Wellesley College and also tracks U.S. investments in clean energy manufacturing.
They're, just being much more strategic in pursuing their initiatives this time.
For example, one executive order told the Department of Justice to stop enforcing state-level laws that hold fossil fuel companies liable. Not ideal, since city and state efforts have been one of the last hopes against Trump's moves.
Okay, so we got our freedom, but management's lousing up everything.
But how can it be that easy for the U.S. to just implode decades of environmental progress?
U.S. politics is weird.
The fact that there are just two alternating parties in power has made legislation a decades-long ping-pong game. But it's not just the two-party system.
The U.S. has a really strong kind of foundation of environmental policy at the federal level, but that was, for the most part, enacted into law by Congress in the 1970s and the 1980s.
By the 1960s, high-profile disasters like the Cuyahoga River literally catching fire from pollution galvanized the public. Nixon, who was in charge back then, faced a firestorm over Vietnam. He was happy to win some domestic points with a bipartisan act. In 1970, he signed into law the National Environmental Policy Act, the cornerstone of U.S. environmental law. So NEPA became the first major law requiring federal agencies to consider environmental impact when making decisions. However,
Congress hasn't done the heavy lifting on making environmental policy since then.
Instead, presidents from both parties began to rely on executive orders and amendments within existing legal frameworks to shape environmental policy. Why? Because it's faster than getting a polarized Congress to pass something. Anything.
To get 67 votes in the Senate to ratify an environmental agreement is impossible today.
Pam Chasik is a professor of political science at Manhattan University and a walking encyclopedia of international climate treaties.
Largely because so many Republicans are suspect of international law, are suspect of environmental law, and see all of this as a source of regulation that's bad for business.
Thing is, this is not Trump's first rodeo. His first term was also packed with efforts to roll back Obama-era policies like the Clean Power Plan, emission standards for cars, and the hydrofluorocarbon regulations. That's the greenhouse gas that keeps your fridge cold. And the glimmer of hope might lie in just how many of these efforts failed. For example, Obama's signature Clean Power Plan aimed to cut power plant emissions by 32% by 2030. Trump tried to replace that with the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. This would have given states more leeway and gotten rid of a national emissions cap, but this rollback died in a federal court in 2021. In fact, most of Trump's biggest climate-related initiatives just petered out in the courts. One study that came out at the end of Trump's first term showed that more than 3/4 of his regulatory moves didn't move forward.
They were found to be illegal or they got hung up on procedural steps.
So the big question now is, how will the courts decide this time?
We can hope for the courts, but is the administration going to listen to the courts? Or are we going what many lawyers call a constitutional crisis, which means we've just gone into full out, autocracy?
Regardless of what happens in the US, it might not completely stop the build-out of clean energy around the world.
The US was never the leader in climate change.
There's loads of money coming in. Global investment in the energy transition surpassed $2 trillion for the first time in 2024. That's twice the amount going to fossil fuels. A recent Bloomberg report shows investors are snatching up green deals. Prices are low for wind, solar, and battery projects. Investors are in it for the long haul, and it doesn't look like Trump will be able to stop them. Just ask Jess Burley, an investor at Planet A Investments. Name is a total coincidence, we promise.
The economics of renewables just makes such fundamentally sound sense, and market forces bring clean tech down the cost curves are pretty hard to resist. I'm sure that they can be slowed, but I really don't think that momentum can be fully halted or reversed.
Trump's clean energy freeze is actually just playing into the hands of one of his biggest obsessions.
China. I love China. The biggest bank in the world is from China.
You said it, man. China accounts for a third of clean energy investments worldwide. It's the world's largest producer of solar panels and wind turbines. With $818 billion invested in 2024, China is funding the energy transition at more than twice the rate of any other economy.
All the countries believe that they should have a fair share of the green pie. At the same time, the sheer economic reality is pretty simple. China is the bakery.
This is Li Shuo, Director of China Climate Hub at the Asia Society Policy Institute.
The key data point here is just over the last 2 years, the low carbon economy in China contributed to about a third of the country's economic growth. If you are the Chinese leader, I don't think you can draw any other conclusion. Then we just need to double down, right? And go further, harder, and faster.
And it has. China's public spending on low-carbon energy research and development has risen by 70% since 2015. Yes, it's still the world's largest emitter, and yes, still burning lots of coal. But the point is that right now, Beijing is driving the global build-out of clean energy. And this will likely continue, regardless of what Trump's up to in Washington. Energy means geopolitics, and the US leaving the Clean Energy Party could seriously reshuffle the global order. In March, British Energy Secretary Ed Miliband went to Beijing in the first time a UK Energy Secretary visited China in 8 years. He and his Chinese counterpart came out of it looking pretty cozy with a renewed clean energy partnership. The EU will only become more reliant on China. In 2023, roughly 98% of Europe's solar panels were imported from the country, which also provides almost 40% of its liquid biofuel imports. Trump's U-turn on climate policy definitely hurts global progress, but markets are mature enough to carry on regardless of American policy, and Trump's moves seem to only be hurting the US's biggest edge: technology.
Increasingly, I meet more Americans at European conferences who are actually saying that they want to expand more to Europe or even move. Investors and founders are increasingly worried not just about the future and climate, but also just about the turbulence that's being created for supply chains, for their own internal processes.
International climate treaties are important, but they alone don't build wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, and EVs. It's the market that'll move things, and Trump's policies means the US is missing out on all the action.
I think we need to increasingly shift our attention to the economic aspect of decarbonization. Whoever has a head start on that and really committed to that agenda over the long run, I think we'll gain an upper hand and will be very best positioned to yield both the economic but also political benefits.
Take it from the OG climate legislator, who was, lest we forget, a Republican.
We must act, and act decisively. It is literally now or never.
Do you think Trump's policies will help or hurt the US? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and go to dw.com for more. See you next time.